The people you meet in the desert at night. Not long ago, my partner and I were driving through reservation land at about 11 o'clock at night in the desert southwest of the USA. We were on a major highway, but as with so many highways in that area, it's not very well used, just barely paved and with only one lane going in each direction. No lights, just reflectors embedded in the pavement. It's not uncommon to go for an hour on this highway without seeing another vehicle. I was reading a book aloud when suddenly my buddy who was driving interrupts and pulls off on the side of the road, braking quickly. "Did you see that?" "No," I replied. "See what?" "The van! It went off of the road." I turned in my seat but couldn't make anything out. On or off the road? It was just darkness all around. He grabbed a flashlight that we keep in the car and asked me to call 911. He's in a medical profession and a lapsed licensed EMT, and I worked in the emergency response, so this isn't a super uncommon occurrence for us. Although not even being able to see the accident was a first for me. I got on the phone with 911 immediately and set about trying to find a mile marker using my phone as a flashlight, eventually settling for giving them approximate GPS coordinates, as I had very little coverage and my GPS was acting flighty in that area. The dispatcher asked me to cross the highway carefully and try to ascertain the status of my passengers since they had gone straight over a hill and presumably into the canyon below. I stayed on the line while I trudged over the sand dunes on the opposite side of the highway. I was a bit nervous to be walking this area in sandals, as we had just recently been discussing the rattlesnake population in the region, and I couldn't really see where I was going and answer the dispatcher questions at the same time. But the scrubby vegetation gave me some purchase, and I finally crested the large dune and could see the outline of the accident site. On the road, the moonlight was blocked by the dunes, but on the side it was strangely bright. I took my brain a bit to make sense of what I was seeing. They had been lucky. The van had turned on its side as it slid, and the friction from the dunes had just barely prevented the entire thing from going over the edge into the massive canyon below. My partner called out to me and asked me to check on the woman in the van. I saw that next to him, standing with a scarecrow-like stiffness, was a young man. He looked dazed and didn't seem to be answering many questions. I got the darkest vibe off of that guy that I've ever encountered. I felt goosebumps crawling up my back, and it was just like there was a permanent ring of shadow around him. I felt very uneasy knowing that either of us were anywhere near him, and made a point to keep visually checking up on them. I proceeded to the site and around the van and called out to identify myself. I heard the voice of a woman inside, and as I walked around the windshield, I could see her. She was crouched in the passenger cabin, clearly in shock, her feet bleeding as she shifted back and forth in the broken glass of the driver's side window. A tall, willowy woman, thin and pale with dark hair. There was also a massive wolfhound panting and appeared equally stunned. I saw they had managed to pry the passenger side door open, and the man must have climbed out through the top that way. The woman spoke to me for a time, calmly and with an urgency I couldn't identify in her voice, and I relayed the information to the dispatcher. Yes, it was just the two of them. No, they didn't seem to be seriously injured. No, nobody had fallen asleep at the wheel. They were on their way to Texas to visit family. They were living out of the van. What I remember most clearly is that I made a couple attempts to convince her to either climb out of the roof or through the back to clear away from the van just to be safe, but she politely refused each time. She said that she didn't want to leave the dog. There was something just wrong about her demeanor. People react differently to stress, and she seemed alert and competent, so I put it to the back of my mind, but I kept being stuck by strangeness in her handling of the situation. Dispatch and I agreed that the paramedics could probably easily break the windshield to free them, and there was no sign of fuel, so it was fine for her to stay in there until they arrived. Once I double-checked that she was secure and wasn't going to go anywhere, I handed off the phone to my partner while I went out to wave in the paramedics, who had accidentally passed the site and were backing towards us from farther up the highway, looking for our flashlights. Thanks to the dispatcher, they pulled off a ways from the site, and I began to brief them when we all heard the dispatch come over the radio. Please be advised that the male passenger is AMS and considered dangerous. AMS stands for altered mental status, suggesting that someone isn't in the normal frame of mind, of any of a variety of reasons. We all stopped in our tracks. The paramedics exchanged a glance, and one went back to the ambulance for additional equipment. I was eager to get back to my partner to make sure he hadn't communicated that to the dispatch out of concern for his safety, but when we arrived on site, they were still talking quietly. I went to my car to find shoes for the woman. The passengers were placed in different ambulances, and the police arrived to take interviews all around. Just as we were about to leave, an officer taking our statements turned to us and said, "It's real messed up. I guess she was driving and he wanted to kill them both, so he grabbed the wheel and overpowered her. It's lucky either of them are alive. After a couple of hours, when we were back to driving, my partner proceeded to fill in the details. When he first got to the scene, the woman was yelling that he had tried to kill her and not to leave her alone with him. She also said that if he got out, he needed to be restrained as he was a danger to himself and others. The man was very eager to be out of the vehicle. Bewildered, my partner had nonetheless helped the guy pry the door open, and once he was out, the guy just clammed up and wouldn't do much more than nod or shake his head in response to questions. He kept thinking that the guy might take off and get lost in the desert, but in the end he had waited. He said the guy had seemed agitated, so he was doing his best to keep him engaged and distracted until help could arrive. It was chilling to realize that what we had thought was an accident was actually a murder-suicide attempt. I really wanted to accompany the woman to the hospital, but for unrelated reasons we couldn't remain. We went back that way during the day on our return trip a week later. We pulled over at the site and climbed over the dunes to see whether they had managed to tow the van all around that sand, and sure enough it was gone. What was unnerving was the realization that if he had chosen any other spot to grab the wheel for miles in both directions, they would have been over a cliff almost immediately. In the dark there was no way for him to tell, but he had chosen the only spot where they could realistically be surviving that accident. My partner then told me that they had gone off the road when they were nearly opposite our little sedan on the highway. If the guy had opted for a head-on collision instead of the off-the-cliff option, we would have been toast. It was a sobering thought. I think of the woman I met that night often, and of her wolfhound being gingerly coaxed in the back of a police car. I really hope they are in a much better place now. As for that guy who tried to kill them all, I certainly hope that he gets help, and that we never have cause to meet again. Crazy lesbian truckers. So since I posted my first Let's Not Meet and all you're very cool and receptive, I decided why not share one of the creepy encounters I have had. Talking over with my as of last night fiance, she recommended I start with this story that happened to her last summer. So every year since we have been dating 6 years, we take a 2-week vacation. Me and the fiance like to switch it up. One year it's a nice resort or cruise, then the next a road trip or camping trip. So last summer we had in our minds to get in our SUV, load up our things, the doggo, go across our state to Nevada, see a bit of Nevada, and then on to Northern California. We have rules on these road trips. We have to stop at every road, side attraction, and stay at the crazy hotels and motels, which is a must. So when I discovered there was a clown museum in Northern Nevada in a town called Tonopah, I knew we had to stay there. This is a great place. Well, fiance hates clowns, like despises them, and that meant we need to stay there. I mean, reservations for one night, and we got into Tonopah. We dropped doggo off at a friends of ours for the night. I don't remember if they allow animals, but my friend had a lot of land, and when we wanted Dogo to run herself ragged and get energy out, so we pull up to this motel, and there is a ton of truckers, some bikers miling around. Fiance can handle her own. She's a cop, so I left her in their car while I ran in to check in. Figured I would check us in, then we could get washed up and go to dinner. I go inside to check in, and that is when this big, burly lesbian trucker makes her way up to my fiance. I come out after securing our room key and see her bent over by the driver's window, wearing her cut-off flannel shirt, Levi's jeans, and what looked like genuine rattlesnake shit kicker cowboy boots. I saw my fiance wearing her. I'm trying to be nice, but I'm losing my cool face, so I clear my throat so I can get into the vehicle. She turns around, sneering, as she looks me up and down, toothpick jutting out of a mouth that hadn't seen a dentist in quite a while. "You're sure skinny here is satisfying her needs," caught her putrid breath in my face, while my fiance exclaimed that I excited her just fine, so she shrugs and saunters off to the group of other truckers. I sigh in relief and we get to our room. I like to say that this is where we last saw her and leave the story at that, but if that was the case, this wouldn't be a Let's Not Meet story, right? That night we are in bed after a round of nocturnal activities. I'm smoking a cigarette mindlessly, shuffling through the few channels, and fiance is browsing the web. There's a knock on the door. We ask who it is, and I hear someone running away from the door. I get out of bed, wrapping a towel around my waist, and stick my head out of the door. No one. After that, there wasn't any more knocks, so we went to bed and woke up early the next day. As we were pulling out, I noticed a semi following us. I chalk it up to someone pulling out and shrug it off. However, when the semi still follows us as we head out to my buddy's farm, we start getting creeped out. I'm about 3 minutes from turning onto my buddy's driveway. He has lots of land and a long-ass driveway. When the semi gets so close to the back bumper, it's almost pushing us. Fiance pulls out phone to call the police, and I swerve into the driveway and book it up to my buddy's driveway. Meanwhile, the semi stops, the door opens, and 3 truckers get out. 2 big butch lesbians, and a big dude, easily 400, 450 pounds. Luckily, my buddy is a crazy survivalist, gun enthusiast, and he comes running out of his garage with his gun. Fiance and I are seriously freaking out, thinking we're going to get in the middle of some crazy gunfight. When the truckers quickly get in their truck and leave, we're going to dial the police, but friend assured us that they wouldn't be bothering us anymore. We quickly gather up Doggo and got the heck out of Dodge. So crazy lesbian truckers, let's not meet again. The bottom of the canyon. In 2011, my uncle invited me on a trip with him and my 2 cousins. We stayed a night in Vegas, then rented an RV for a trip through Utah and Arizona. Our final destination was the Grand Canyon. We spent a few days driving around to all the tourist destinations, such as Eagle Point. Our nights were spent in the RV parks that we found along the way. On our final leg of the trip, we headed to an Indian reservation. We got some really awesome photos and went on a thoroughly interesting tour. On the last night, we were driving around looking for an RV park to sleep in. We didn't want to rough it on the side of a road because it would be freezing cold, and we needed to empty the sewage tank. Unfortunately, our phones were giving us problems due to a poor signal. My uncle was tired of driving and determined that we would have to pull over. We took this opportunity to stretch out and stargaze. The stars looked beautiful in the night sky. We were in an incredibly rural, unpopulated area. There were hardly any other cars or people. As a result, there were no light pollution and the stars glowed intensely. On one side of the long dirt road was a steep hill with boulders and shrubs. On the other side of the canyon, to our surprise, the dark was broken by high beams coming towards us. A car was slowly cruising down the road. The driver pulled over next to us and got out. He was a Native American man, and he told us he was a local. His hat nearly covered his eyes, and his beard grew over his mouth. We greeted him respectfully and asked if we knew of any RV parks. He said we were reasonably far from the tourist areas and that there were none over here. He asked us how we got here, and we told him that we were sort of driving aimlessly in hopes that we would find an RV park. He laughed and started to tell us about the part of the canyon that we were standing next to. He sounded like a tour guide, spewing facts out. He offered to take us down an unmarked trail that only the locals hiked. He said it would have beautiful, scenic spots. Beguiled by his story and knowledge, we agreed to follow him. He got some hiking gear from his car and urged us to gather some of our own. We climbed into our RV and gathered our stuff. As I put on my boots, I watched him circle our RV through the window. Once we were ready, he led us a quarter-mile down the road. We reached his fabled location, and he shined his flashlight off the edge of the cliff to show us the path. I knew this wasn't an official trail, but it didn't look like a trail at all. We followed him down an incredibly steep bank with tons of loose rocks. He led us around a few turns and through several tight caverns. We found ourselves on a big, flat rock, and we stopped to take some pictures. He led us deeper and deeper into the canyon. "Want to go to the bottom?" he asked us. It was dark and we were tired, so we declined. We kept following him for about 10 minutes. We saw a few birds eating a small animal along the way. It struck me that we were truly in the untouched wilderness. We were uncomfortably close to the edge of the cliff many times. My uncle grew a bit uneasy and asked them to lead us back. He agreed and told us that he knew of a shortcut back up to where we were. He told us to wait there and disappeared out of sight. We were all a bit nervous at this point because we had no idea where we were. We waited about 10 minutes, taking more photos to pass the time. Eventually, my uncle walked off in the direction the man left. My cousins and I were afraid to be alone, so we trailed him tensely. He came back and told us that he didn't see the man. We waited another 10 minutes before giving up. "He's not coming back," my uncle told us. I began to wonder what could have happened to him. Did he fall? Did he get lost? Did he ditch us? I couldn't understand why. he would have left us there. He seemed so friendly, and we were oddly eager to trust him. We started to hike back to whence we came. The problem was, nobody remembered exactly where we came from. The terrain was incredibly unsafe, and we realized we could not navigate it on our own. My uncle called out a few times, but the only response was his own echo. We found ourselves testing ridges that we were certain we hadn't come across before. Foot placement was key, as many rocks were wobbly. My little cousin started to cry, and we had to hold on to her jacket. It felt like we were lost in a labyrinth. My uncle remarked over and over that he knew it was a bad idea, but it was too late now, since this was not a real trail. There were no markings to help us. The only source of light came from our flashlights. I tried not to look over the edge. We were incredibly high up. I didn't want to be in the back of the pack, but I wasn't prepared to lead it either. I just wanted to be back in the RV. Our anxiety was building as the moon sunk. We joked that we could survive a night in the canyon, since my cousin was an Eagle Scout. However, we were merely trying to take our minds off of the situation. Finally, we found ourselves on the big, flat rock. We recognized a series of caverns we crossed through and climbed back out as well. It was such a relief to be back on the dirt road. We walked towards our RV, looking for the man as we staggered on. We came upon our RV, but the man's car was gone. He left us. We quickly put the pieces together. We were angry and felt incredibly foolish. As I got closer to our RV, I noticed that the door was creaked open. I remember locking it when we left. Immediately, tears began to build up in my eyes. I wasn't sure if the adrenaline had gotten the best of me, or if I truly had a reason to be afraid. "Hold on," my uncle said, as he swung the door open. My cousins and I were too afraid to go inside, but we were not particularly content being outside either. My uncle took a few steps into the RV and blurted out, "Guys, we have been robbed." We piled into the RV and froze. None of us wanted to venture too deep in. I began thinking of all the stuff I had stored in there. Our suitcases were thrown on the floor, and the clothing was scattered. My iPad was gone. My uncle's wallet was gone. My cousin's jewelry was gone. And my other cousin's phone was gone, amongst other things. I felt so violated. We were all quiet, and none of us slept. My uncle started the RV, and we drove off, looking for civilization. Fortunately, we had enough gas to make it back to the RV rental place. We phoned the police and they filed the reports, but nothing ever came of it. My word of advice: if someone asks you to go to the bottom of the canyon, say no.